At basis, though, I really think that these were more CIA assets, people that were recruited, like all of the folks I've been issuing visas to a couple of years previously. And these people were tools to be done for a job.
When people hear the name Bush, they instantly think about the blunderous president, George W. Bush. However, it was his father, George H.W. Bush, who was the real power player. A director at the CIA, a 3-term president. I know what you're thinking, 3-term what? Well, yes, of course, George H.W. Bush was the 41st president of the United States from 1989 to 1993, but he was also the vice president to Ronald Reagan from 1981 to 1989. Reagan, a former Hollywood actor, was a gifted public speaker, and unlike George W. Bush, liked to tell jokes intentionally.
About the man walking along the street at night, Moscow, Soviet soldier called to him to halt. He started to run, the soldier shot him. And another man said, "Why did you do that?" Well, he said, "Curfew." Well, he said, "It isn't curfew yet." He said, "I know, he's a friend of mine, I know where he lives, he couldn't have made it."
Much like the relationship between Dick Cheney and George W. Bush, the vice president cast a dominant spell, and the president provided the comic relief. Shortly after the Catalyst event in 2001, when there were still restrictions on US airspace, the White House authorized a large-scale evacuation of prominent Saudis from the United States. According to American journalist Craig Unger, there were a total of 8 planes stopping in 12 American cities, picking up over 140 passengers, most of them Saudi, including more than 24 members of the bin Laden family. Speaking of the bin Laden family, in the 1970s, 2 young Saudi billionaires, Salim bin Laden, the older brother of Osama bin Laden and heir to the great Saudi bin Laden Group fortune, and Khalid bin Mahfouz, heir to the National Commercial Bank of Saudi Arabia, had journeyed to Houston in the 1970s, becoming friendly with James Bath, a friend of George W. Bush's in the Texas Air National Guard. This relationship would prove very fruitful for the Bush family. The bin Laden family were intimately connected with the House of Saud. Indeed, the House of Saud would go on to put more than $1.4 billion in investments and contracts to companies in which the Bushes and their friends had key roles.
In the early 1980s, bin Laden worked with operatives from U.S. intelligence, the Pakistani military, and Arab states. They ran a wide-ranging covert network that recruited and financed Muslim fighters to battle the Soviet army.
Osama bin Laden was actually a CIA asset under the codename Tim Osman.
The relationship between bin Laden and the CIA was essentially, he was one of their assets, one of the people they could turn to for help if they had questions. If they wanted somebody recruited, if they wanted somebody sent somewhere, if they wanted information, if they wanted something done, they went to bin Laden.
As we have discussed before, the relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia, specifically its ruling family, the House of Saud, has been of mutual benefit. The Saudis get military protection from geopolitical enemies, and the Americans can drive demand for US debt and US dollars. This cozy relationship is the reason why the Saudi regime has been given a free pass.
But do the real Saudis really love America? Not according to Saud al-Faghi, a surgeon who was jailed and then forced out of Saudi Arabia 7 years ago for advocating reform.
There is almost a universal feeling that the Americans are conspiring with the royal elite to loot the country, loot its resources, and to cover the oppression and the bad deeds of the regime.
In November 2001, George W. Bush passed an executive order. Specifically, Executive Order 13233 limited the ability of the public to access presidential records by giving the sitting president and former presidents an effective veto over the release of their records. Perhaps more importantly, the Bush executive order also included the records of former vice presidents. It effectively replaced the Presidential Records Act's limited 12-year restriction period with a potentially indefinite limitation on access. But why even bring this up? How is this relevant? Well, it turns out that this is about more than just the relationship between the House of Saud and the House of Bush. It is not even about Dick Cheney and Halliburton. It goes much deeper than that. It is a fascinating story involving George H.W. Bush. It is in many ways a dangerous story for those who dare to tell it. And it is this story which will form the basis of the next video.